Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome from us at Ocean Technologies Group. Thank you for joining us for this webinar about e-learning strategies for safety, compliance and performance. So, first thing I'd like to do, just after I mention about the questions, be to introduce the speakers. Now, if you do have any questions as we go through this section, please add them to the Q&A box on the right hand side of your screen, and we have got some time reserved at the end of the session to answer those questions, so we will come to them. If we have a huge number of questions, if there's any that we don't get to in time, we will contact you afterwards. We'll follow it up with an email and come back to you with the answers to any questions you have. So like I said, what I'd like to do now is just introduce our speakers for today, Rahul Harris and Andy Easdown. So over to you, Rahul, if you'd just like to do a little introduction there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, James. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us this morning. So I'm Rahul Harris. I'm Chief Creative Officer here at Ocean Technologies Group. And my background is basically 20 years this year in working in maritime e-learning, starting all those years ago. So my career has been large part of it spent in turning kind of learning requirements that have come along for different bits of regulation, legislation, best practice, and turning that into e-learning solutions so that seafarers typically, but sometimes shore-based personnel as well, can work through curriculums and gain vital learning. And today I'm working with Ocean Technologies Group with a slightly different remit, and we're sort of going through at the moment this merger with One Ocean. So it's a much broader kind of appreciation of how mariners, seafarers and so on work with technology and stuff. But I still work on many industry groups looking over. So one of the elements there that I'm looking at a lot at the moment is the energy transition and the learning needs associated with that, as well as lots of very specific elements of e-learning as well. So it's my pleasure to hopefully share a bit of insight that I've picked up over the years, not least insights I've picked up from the gentleman whose picture is next to mine up there, Andy Easdown. So Andy, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction, Rob. I've been in the maritime industry for 49 years this year. Can't hardly believe it. 50 years coming up. 28 of those years were with the Lloyd's Register as a surveyor, as a manager, and latterly the last part of my career was as a training manager. I then went to Shell and worked with Shell for 3 years. And I've had a relationship with one form or another of OTG, Videotel it was actually originally, but also Seagull, for about 20 odd years, since 2001 actually. So I've been involved in commissioning e-learning, using e-learning, specifying e-learning, and of course making sure that companies actually get tangible benefits from it. So that's the real key to it. It's very easy just to assign somebody some e-learning, but what you actually want, and really the purpose of this webinar, is to make sure that you get some tangible benefit from it. And that's what I hope we will discuss during the course of this short session.
And Andy, I just suddenly realised that when we first met 20 years ago, it was you when you were working for Lloyd's, and you were commissioning Videotel to help develop an e-learning course for surveyors.
That's right, and those exact same reasons for commissioning e-learning still here, really, from the sense that you want something that you can rapidly deploy to everybody, that gives a consistent message, that allows people to study in their own time, that gives them the opportunity to share a common understanding, and that's really important, and nothing really that you can do. Certainly we couldn't pull hundreds, if not thousands, of surveyors to one location to give them that training in a classroom, but the opportunity to, whatever the time zone, whatever people were, wherever they were located, to give them the opportunity to study that particular program, as I say, achieve that sort of common understanding of the situation, definitely achieved some significant improvements in the performance of our surveyors. So we were very pleased. I know it's paying you compliments back, but you know, that was a little piece of something which some work which was very particular to us, so it wasn't something we could go and buy off the shelf. And that most of the programs that we would be discussing are off-the-shelf programs, but it just shows the power that you can achieve with an e-learning program.
And I think it kind of, we'll get to it in a minute, but I think it also shows that e-learning, having an e-learning strategy is going to be a bit of a mix of that. It is going to be a mix between things that you can find off the shelf that deal with sort of generic requirements, and then things that can kind of personalize it. So we might get into that today. So let's have a look at the agenda, what we're going to cover this session today. Obviously, we've done the introductions. We'll talk about e-learning strategy. We're going to get into a lot of data. So what does data kind of tell us about performance and where it might be linked to e-learning? And I say might be because causality is always difficult to prove, but we'll give you some indicators. I think we've got a big enough data set to give you some indicators around that. Then we'll kind of look at some of our customer data, not specific customers, I hasten to add. We'll look at anonymized data that kind of shows different trends and what we can see and observe. Then there'll be like the Q&A. And I think James said, about how to post the questions. You can post questions as we go along. But as you heard this morning, Andy's hugely experienced. I've had my fair share of action in the last 20 years, and we're happy to kind of take any questions that you might have or deal with any specific, consider it a surgery really, where you can ask some specific questions of us, and we'll do our best to answer them. And then we'll kind of just have a little recap at the end. As James said, we normally try and hit the 10 minutes or so of questions at the end. So hopefully you'll have some. So let's get rolling. If you go to the next slide, let's start off by, Andy, you started touching on it then, but I think specifically in a maritime kind of context, Andy, why do you think it makes sense to sort of make e-learning part of the mix of any ship operator today?
Similar to the statements I made earlier, really, about the ease of delivery, that sort of consistency of message that you get across, the fact that you can use it for so many different purposes. So you've got the sort of company messages that you need to pass across. You've also got the opportunities for personal development. You've got the opportunities for in-rank development. All of these things can be achieved using e-learning combined with practical experience. So, sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of touch on a couple of, because there's a few more points we want to make, but I think there's a couple of things that in there that are sort of worth digging on. I think digging into. I think we talk about the immediacy, the ease of delivery. We have in maritime, we have a sort of unique challenge, don't we? In the sense that we've got that detachment from people in the workplace. Their workplace is, floating somewhere in the sea. And you've got that sort of detachment from head office. It is difficult, isn't it, to kind of logistically to get people where they need to be able to undertake training. Some people, fleet, it's not unusual that fleet captains might go to vessels to try and deliver some e-learning. But I guess with relatively small crews on most cargo ships, it's difficult probably from a cost perspective to do that. So it is quite an effective way of doing it, isn't it, in terms of it? And given that lag between when you can actually create a piece of learning and get that person to that place to do that learning, it is a more immediate way now, thanks to connectivity, I guess, to kind of deliver that.
And that's really what's changed in certainly the last quarter of a century is that, as you'll remember, sending out VHS tapes in a box, then moving on to DVDs, onboard computers, and now we're at the stage where we can actually, a company can specify that somebody does some e-learning, and if they're connected by some kind of satellite link, that can be done immediately on board the ship, or it could be done but when they come within range of mobile telephone signal as they go close to shore.
And we have found as well that seafarers, when they are at home, so that they don't have to then travel and lose time away from family and stuff, going to training centres, that where it's appropriate, where it's obviously, and I should make this point up front as well, that nothing you're going to hear today is anybody saying that e-learning is the answer to everything.
No.
It's very much part of the mix. And
Yeah.
I think one of the other things that I'll mention while it comes to my mind is, having been a teacher, I used to teach at a university, and before that, I used to teach English language and stuff. One of the challenges as a teacher is when you've got different people at different levels in the class, different levels of knowledge and stuff. So it is a way of allowing people to learn at their own pace and sort of level up before you bring them together, perhaps to do a more interactive part of the lesson, where you're actually getting them to be involved in that sort of thing as well. So
that's very, very important as well, because for a lot of people, the subtitles on an e-learning program can be as important as the voiceover, because if they're struggling a little bit with their language skills, the opportunity to take their time to go back over something, to read the subtitles, to look up what do those words actually mean, that's really helpful. And it's surprising. You think, oh, e-learning is sort of like a one size fits all, and if you're not the right size, it won't work for you. But the fact of the matter is, it actually does help a lot of people in many different ways. Mm-hmm. And so and people do have different styles of learning. Some people are very visual, some people like to listen, some people want, like say, more time to actually understand something. But that point as well about bringing everybody to the same level, so that when you're actually in the practical situation, you can have a discussion based on the knowledge that they've learned during the e-learning, and can be really helpful, because everybody's at the same kind of level of understanding there. Whereas if you just try to have that discussion without doing that, you might find that there are gaps in people's knowledge, and they're not really sure about what you're discussing.
The scalability thing as well is something that I think is a really interesting discussion point, because you mentioned there about, to try and get all those surveyors to a certain place, to be able to do that. And when I've started on many of the particularly bespoke e-learning projects that I've worked on, it's quite often that's been the paradigm, that there's one person in the company who's the expert on, subject X.
Yeah.
And they've got to fly. I'm talking about a big ship manager here, for example, and they've got to fly, to the office in Venezuela, in one, like they've got to go on a world tour, effectively, India, all around to be able to kind of impart this knowledge. And that's been one of the things that we've done, is actually looked at that and said, well, look, this is not sustainable for this person or for this company. If we can capture that knowledge in a way and get that delivery down in a way, it gives us a chance to then scale and to go through it as well. So I think thinking about the bespoke elements of that, but obviously we'll get into a little bit more about that. And also as well, on the screen there, you can see about revalidation of certification and the sort of ongoing independent learning. But two elements there to think about, I think, before we get into those topics. With the scalability thing, when it comes to something like new fuels, we are going to be having that issue where there's not going to be the people necessarily in training centres that have some of that skill. So looking at techniques like this and having an e-learning as part of that strategy mix makes a lot of sense, to be able to think about that scalability. And that will lead us into the certification thing, because I know, Andy, you're working very much in the new fuel space at the moment, looking at how that's going to work. I do think that those kind of credentials are going to become even more important myself, in terms of how we kind of design pathways from working with one fuel to another to obtaining vital certification. I don't know whether, I don't want to get sidetracked, because that's a massive topic on its own, but you're right in the mix of that at the moment. So what are your thoughts around that side of things?
Well, the benefit of working with a worldwide group of experts is something you can't underestimate. So we're not talking about one person's particular take on this. We're looking across the board at a range of people, from industry experts, engine manufacturers, the people who actually produce the new fuels. We're talking to the associations that set standards. So, for example, the SGMF or, the Intertanko people. So we're looking at a very broad range of inputs to make sure that whatever is produced is of the highest standards and the best known evidential information that's available at this particular time. So we are all in the situation where there's very limited knowledge about this subject, but actually the e-learning that will be produced is going to be world class in the sense of there's nobody who knows more than the people who've been involved in preparing that e-learning. So there's another benefit in the sense that you're having, rather than just one lecturer's ideas about a particular subject in a particular school or nautical college, you've got this sort of blend of expert knowledge.
Well, yeah, sort of consensus really,
Yeah.
and also standardization, which is going to be really important as people move from ship to ship.
Yeah.
Which brings us neatly to the idea of evidence, which is up on the screen there. And this is one of the things that I think is helpful, let's say, with e-learning. The fact that every piece of e-learning that you've done is recorded against an individual account, hopefully, as you said, Andy, to a standard, a recognized standard that people can look at across the board. But particularly in the maritime context, why is evidence important?
It's really significant, and it's not to be underestimated either, because so many standards that shipping is being held to requires evidence to demonstrate that people have actually received the training in a particular subject area. So whether that's right ship, you might be having a right ship inspection where you'll be required, for example, something quite straightforward, hatch covers. Have the crew receive training in how the hatch covers on board their ship work? It could be from port state control wanting evidence to show that training has been achieved. It could be SIRE, all of the different areas where you come across the kind of officialdom at the administration, all require evidence, and more increasingly so, charterers as well. The charterers want to know that people have had this training, that they are aware of the standards and the requirement. And of course, if you've got the e-learning system, it will record that. You can immediately show, yes, these people have all received this particular training.
And just to be clear on that as well, like very often with this, I'll just pick up the charterers point because it was interesting. I did a case study with a customer of ours last week on stage in London, and he raised the fact that a charter had actually specified a specific CBT, that piece of e-learning title, by the name and the code number, that they wanted that to know that everybody had done that specific title. So that's kind of quite an extreme example. Yeah. Often people are looking just to prove that you do what you say you do, right? That what's in the safety management system, you say we give everybody an induction familiarization training on these things. It's about sort of evidencing that as well.
Yeah.
But when it comes to things like TMSA and right ships getting increasingly similar as well, there are specific elements and topics and stuff that they're nominating, aren't there?
Yes. So certainly in the right ship area, the number of questions quite significant. I mean, if you go through the right ship RASQ, the ship questionnaire, it's a 220 plus page document with over 550 questions in it. Not all of which apply, but a surprising number of them do actually have a question about training. So the RASQ is a comprehensive document. It gives a lot of detail about what's expected. And part of that expectation is that training will have been carried out. And they are looking for specific training, whether it's in something like ECDIS or, as I mentioned already, hatch covers, and they give detail about what they're expecting. They want to see that people have studied a course, that they've studied the documentation that goes with that particular product, whether it's an ECDIS or a hatch cover, and that they've gone and done some practical training. So coming back to that sort of idea of blending, doing e-learning to support other activities, really, really very important.
And also you'll see, if you look at TMSA, you'll see that depending on the level that you're looking to reach, they might specify that the company does training
Yes.
on, say, cultural awareness and stuff like that. We'll get into that. I've just noticed the time. That's the problem whenever I talk to you, Andy. The time just starts. I hope we haven't lost people. But let's get on now into sort of what we're really talking about in terms of the when we talk about collecting evidence, we talk about the e-learning sort of delivery system, if you like.
Yeah.
This is what we're talking about today. All the context of this is talking about our Ocean learning platform. And, you know, this is obviously you'd expect us to talk about our products, but please stay with us. This isn't a sales pitch. There are other, there are other things that you might be using. The thing about the Ocean learning platform that's important in this context is that it's ubiquitous, to the sense that there's an onboard solution. So you can, any of the training that you do on board, it could be a sort of effectively like a kiosk, which is unconnected, and the training recorded on that. It could be on your ship's network, and the results of any training that's done are collected locally. It could be done online. It can be done via the mobile app as well. And that's, you know, downloaded so that the seafarers can effectively study that in their own time. The nice thing about being able to download it is it's really easy if you're in transit, as many seafarers are, to kind of catch up on a bit of training before you get there. The point is that wherever you do that training, you're going to get a centralized record of it, which means that you've then got that evidence, and people can then look at the reporting side of things to see where they are in their fleet, where they are in an individual ship, even down to the individual level, and see if that person is on track with all of the training that's been prescribed to them. And then obviously from that, you can generate reports for the sorts of contexts that we talked about, to be able to show inspectors, to be able to show charterers for internal presentations, whatever you want to do. So this is the context that we're talking about in there. Now, it mentions up there's like 1,000+ e-learning titles. That number is going to go up and down all the time, because we're constantly rationalizing the library. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see kind of what that library kind of entails. And this is a sort of a helpful kind of look at it, really, because it tends to follow, this pyramid tends to kind of follow the extent to which customers utilize e-learning in the context of, you know, their relationship with us. So very much down the bottom, the kind of compliance stuff, the vital material that talk about sort of the sorts of things that are in STCW, in MARPOL, in SOLAS, etc., MLC, those core kind of pillars, if you like, that underpin all of our sort of regulation. And then once you go up to the beyond compliance area, these are the sorts of things that we're looking at, like some of the things we've mentioned there, like sort of, I guess, charterers' recommendations around things like the standards set by OCIMF or SIGTO. These organizations that are kind of specifying you go a little bit higher, and typically, not always, but typically that matches the risk profile of the vessels involved in the trade. So once you get into gas tankers and things like that. Specialist material, this is going to be for, I'd say, a subset of the crew. This is where we're looking at things where you might want someone to play a specific role. So that could be your safety officer, your security officer, a nominated kind of role like that. And it might be that there's specific OEM manufacturer training that's involved in that you want specific people to do that. So certified courses are kind of a good part of this, really, specialist material where you can obtain certification. And then up the top there, custom content sitting on the top, the stuff that's going to be specific to you as a company. And increasingly, that could be a combination of tools you've developed yourself. It could be things that you've commissioned to have made for you if you want to go sort of blue ribbon it. Or it could be something that you've used, and we probably won't get into that today, but we have tools in our platform that allow you to kind of create very quickly your own content. And Andy, I think I've kind of whistled through everything, but your role here that you do for us very kindly is sort of keep an eye on all of that and sort of tell us what we should be doing and where. So I don't know whether you want to add anything to that.
Yes, so we have the monthly impact report, which we update, which looks at titles which are needed for the future, whether ones that we already have need to be updated. So for example, we're looking at all of the statutory ones as the legislation changes to see, do we need to update that particular piece of piece of material. When something like a new sulfur emission control area comes in, we know we have to look at a certain number of titles where we change the map, for example, something as straightforward as that. But yeah, this does really reflect the usage very well.
And really, Andy, because just in the interest of time, it's kind of like about investment, right? It's sort of like how invested you are, how much you spend. Now, where there's that, people are making that investment, how do we kind of give them any return on investment? And I mentioned the problem with e-learning is, it's very difficult to prove causality in the sense that, there's so many factors that make up a kind of a well-run and a safe ship. But we believe certainly that it's contributed to it. And we talked about evidence. And one of the areas of evidence that's kind of interesting for us particularly is port state control, which you mentioned. And the reason that port state control is good for us is that it's publicly available information, which means that we can use it as a data reference point, and we can overlay we can segment that data based on our customer profiles and stuff like that. So the question that we're asking is, do our customers, people that are using a learning solution, an e-learning kind of part of their safety management and their learning as an organization, do they receive any benefits as far as that data is concerned? So let's have a look at the data on the next slide. And you'd be horrified if it was not the case, wouldn't you, after I'd set it up like that? But quelle surprise, we can see that there is a differential in there in terms of when we talk about deficiencies. So deficiencies are much more common than detention. Thankfully, there's fewer detentions. But Andy, really, this is what is the port state control data sort of telling us, not so much the numbers, but what are these deficiencies and detentions, and why is it important?
And it's such a powerful slide that you've put up here, Raoul, because it is one of the opportunities that an e-learning provider has to demonstrate that there is a significant difference, which, as you say, if you like, almost the holy grail of training provision, whether it's e-learning or other training, is to demonstrate that there is actually a benefit, a cost saving. So in terms of port state control, what we're seeing here, what the figures are telling us, is that OTG customers have fewer deficiencies and fewer detentions, and that translates into quite a significant cost saving, in the sense that you only have to be detained for a day on a vessel with a charter rate of $50,000 a day, plus you've got to do the remedial works. You could be looking, even for something relatively straightforward, $100,000 or more. And of course, if it turns into several days, and I've known ships to be detained for a week, for example, waiting for spare parts to come, waiting for an engineer to turn up, that is a really significant issue for the company. So there is a direct cost related to this, but also think about the reputation as well of the company. Do you want to be the company that's known as having a poor port state control performance record? These are issues which are really almost sort of intangible, but you want to build up this picture as reliable, safe, good performing company, and your port state control record is one of the easiest ones to look at. As you said, it's publicly available. Anybody can look at it. They can see, oh, look, unfortunately, several ships from this company are being regularly detained.
And Andy, I think that's one of the things that's changed in the world, is the readiness of information and the availability of information. So, for example, in the old days, this stuff was available as PDFs, and you could kind of download and kind of go through them. Now we're in this world of data where people have put their systems, bring Power BI, import this stuff, and run these reports. And it's not unusual now. I have customers say to me that they've seen a charterer will call them up about something that's appeared in a port state control thing. So even without the kind of SIRE inspections, just on the port state side. So and I just want to be clear about this as well, what we're looking at here, in case anybody's in any doubt. We've segmented fleet-wide performance, and we've said, right, here's all our customers. what can we see as the differential? And we've got a few different slices of this report, which if you're interested, we can look at where you can segment it by different other factors as well, things they might be doing, things they might be using. And I must be clear about this. We're not saying we are the reason why. It could just be that these are the best performers, and the best performers happen to be our customers. That could be what we're talking at here. But the volumes of data that we've got are so large that this implies that at least having a structured approach to learning, onboard learning, an e-learning strategy does contribute to a better performance overall. And so let's kind of hold that thought in your mind, because what we're going to do now is we're going to look at specific areas, trying to kind of attach it to some port state observations as well that we'll see as we kind of go through this. And what I want you to keep in your mind as we walk through this here is, very often in the past, it's always frustrated me that there's sort of been a bit of in some areas, there's been a bit of a kind of an attitude that, yeah, training is something that we do for compliance. We have to show that we've done training. And then real life happens over here. This is where the work goes on. And that approach is always going to fail, completely going to fail, because seafarers are busy people. If they think that this is just something they're doing to tick a box, they're going to be very creative in finding ways that they can kind of make that box be ticked, right?
Yep.
If you actually take a different approach as an organization and you look at it from the point of view saying, like, what do my people need to know to meet my organizational goals? These are the things that I want to achieve as a company. And what do my people need to be able to, what are the skills that they need to have? How can I develop those skills? And some of that may be through, blended learning approach. It could be lots of different things, but e-learning will, I suspect, have a place within that where you're putting in underpinning knowledge. And we'll talk about some specific things now, some specific areas that you could think about as we go along. And we'll see what some of that data that we've got from the same data source that we just run the other report that you see. And we'll kind of just from that, Andy and I will have a bit of a conversation about what we think that data might mean. So we'll start off looking at that bottom rung of the layer. We'll talk about safety matters, because obviously that is what most people go to. They're looking for to safety. And at the core of that is personal safety series. So this is a series of titles. So we're looking at, I can't remember how many titles it is in total, because currently that part of the screen is being obscured by my and Andy's head. 16. So there's 16 titles within the personal safety series. And we're looking at this graph over time of usage. Okay, so that's what we're seeing there. And you can see there's a huge amount of activities on the right. So what we can see there is total activities. That means how many people have effectively triggered that piece of e-learning, and then completed activities. That's a kind of crucial one as well. How many people went all the way through to the end and got that, did that assessment or whatever at the end and completed that whole thing there. So you can see it's kind of a little bit of a drop off there. Not particularly surprising, I don't think, Andy, the data there in terms of, pretty steady. Yes, it goes up from 22 a little bit, and it's kind of going up and down, but fairly consistent picture with that one.
And as you say, very large numbers of users, because quite often personal safety is one of the induction e-learning programs that people will be tasked with doing. So most companies will set a training matrix. They will outline in there which courses they want people to follow. And personal safety is one of those very high usage programs. And that would be typically as well, that this might be in a familiarization thing, right? Because it covers so many things about just keeping yourself safe and and also refresher training as well, to show that people have actually had a reminder about it. Good, but fairly consistent, as you might expect, is in there. Let's jump ahead to one of the biggest killers, sadly, in our industry, enclosed spaces. And this one, again, quite a few titles in here that are dealing with different aspects of enclosed spaces. There are sort of elements that are, we haven't got time to drill into all of them, but like management, entry, rescue, all those sorts of things. This is a sort of a general snapshot as well. And again, very high number of activities, 1 million there, almost everybody
doing that, going through in there. Again, no surprises there really, Andy.
No, I mean, a 99% completion rate is very encouraging, but unfortunately we still do see a number of deaths each year. And trying to think about how can we prevent those and what has helped, if you like. The numbers could of course be a lot higher without the kind of programs that are available now. One of the key things I would say is unfortunately that every new person coming on board ship, every new cadet joining an nautical college somewhere, needs to have this training. It's so important to get this done at a very, very early stage, because when you get on board ship and you're asked to go and do something, you need to have that knowledge in your head, because unfortunately even experienced people can make mistakes. But so having this training, and I mean, I don't know, I think over the course of my career I've studied enclosed training almost on a yearly basis to try and see what could I do to improve the training of our young surveyors, for example, or our seafarers at Shell. What were the things that we could do to try and help people? So this is one of those ones which is really, really vital.
Yeah, good. I think we're going to have to pick up the pace a little bit here. Let's move along from that one. I mean, I could talk about enclosed spaces all day long. Fire is an interesting one in the port state control thing, because when I look through deficiencies, it's always up there. And yet when I look at it this is very high, as you might expect, in usage again. Lots of people clearly working on that, fairly steady, use of it. But it is one of those areas that sort of does come up a lot in the port state control.
Again, if you look at the top 10 list of port state control, I think ever since the data has been published, more than 20 years now, fire safety is nearly always number one. And for various reasons, whether it's the readiness or availability of the equipment, or it's fire flaps, or it's hoses, or whatever it is, fire safety is a really key one.
Sorry, Andy. I was just going to jump to the next one as well, which is lifeboats. And this one I'm actually really encouraged to see that it is upticking, because this is another area that is very commonly pulled up in the port state control inspections. But it's also one of these crazy situations where the drills and stuff are actually, people are getting injured, and sometimes fatally injured in dealing with lifeboats. And when I look at the usage data, although the uptick is there, look how low that is really by comparison. 300, it's something that people should be thinking about, I think, a lot
more. Yeah, definitely.
Because there is a lot of underpinning knowledge with that in terms of understanding how the mechanisms work, the different kind of safety protocols and stuff in there. There is underpinning knowledge that can be acquired as far as lifeboats is concerned.
Definitely.
I can see some questions coming in. So let's kind of move on. So safety, I think the picture on safety is, broadly speaking, clearly being fairly consistently part of what people have been doing. If we go to environment, though, I think there's some interesting things to talk about from e-learning strategy point of view. The first of those being that there's very few mandations to train on environment. In the way that safety is kind of insistent on training. But this is a good example with the oil record book here of something where there's no training obligation, but if you get it wrong, the penalties are very high.
Very good.
You could have done nothing wrong, but you could have actually filled the book in wrong, and it would appear to show that you'd put oil over the side of the ship fundamentally. Then you could find yourself in very hot water and potentially on an environmental compliance plan. So it makes sense to have a learning strategy around that. For me, that's too low. The 78k looks like, there should be a lot of people in there. But the graph is interesting, isn't it?
Well, and I think it relates to one of the questions perhaps that we'll come to in the chat about external events. And I think it's pretty clear there that there was a spike in interest in that period between July and 23 and Jan 24. Around probably a case where there was a huge fine, maybe in the millions of dollars, where obviously companies realized that they needed to put more effort into the training of people, because as you say, Rob, it's not particularly complicated thing to do, but if you don't put the quantities in correctly, you could easily show, for example, that you had retained sludge on board rather than you'd actually burnt it, for example. And then there want to be, the port state control will say, well, what's the discrepancy here? It shows that you've got 20 tons of sludge missing. And if you haven't got that to show that you'd incinerate it correctly, that could lead to some very awkward questions for the company. And
absolutely. And Jan is asking, is there a reference to how much the heightened usage data is caused by external factors? And he asks, specifically, right, ship, we'll maybe get to some of your question, Jan, in a bit more detail about, but in terms of explaining of the numbers, look at that. That's relatively low, that 78K. When you think that some of the really big ship managers might be, 20, 30, 40,000 crew, it wouldn't be unusual for one of those, if they insisted everybody went through the training, that could cause a spike like that. Or as you say, Andy, it could be that there was a big story in the news and a few people got together and said, hey, we need to do something about this. But my message to everyone here is that should be a core title. That's too low when you think of the risk that you're exposed to.
The companies may well think, oh, just the chief engineer, he's the one who fills out the book, only he needs to do it. But actually, it'd be very good for masters to do it, because they should be advising when overboard discharges can be made, for example. And also, for the other engineering officers, they shouldn't leave this until they become a chief engineer to actually understand this subject. So,
next up, sort of energy management. I put this one in. I mean, obviously, there's a lot more to this. There, we could have looked at SEAMP titles. We could have looked at CII, more general kind of mandated energy training. But I've chosen this one because I wanted to give an example of sort of trends, the way the wind is blowing in the industry. And clearly, a lot of the environmental legislation stuff that we're looking for now is encouraging people to be much more mindful of the energy that they use. And you can see on this one, quite a big growth there, given that this is all, we're talking about ISO standards. We're talking about sort of, specific training for the crew in terms of how they can be mindful of the energy that they use. So no mandation in this bit. That would be more in the SEAMP kind of territory. So this is just a kind of evidence of a trend towards companies who are looking at that. And you can see a very steep kind of growth in that just in this year. Yeah.
And of course, everybody's struggling to meet their 2030 obligations when it comes to carbon reduction. And the easiest and best way to do that, of course, is to reduce the amount of fuel that you use. So energy management is one of those which is going to be increasingly important. And I think this is, if you like, in a sense, the best example I could think of at the moment of getting that message across from the company to the people on board ship about what is expected of them and how can they actually practically improve the situation, and getting everybody to have that same level of understanding about why it's important and the measures that they can take. So they can't influence things like whether the company decides to fit rotor sails or solar panels or whatever necessarily, but they can understand the processes and they can understand the background to it all, so that when measures do come into place, they're ready to implement them correctly.
We really are going to have to pick up the pace. I've just noticed the time here. So let's dive on. Just want to don't really need to go too much into detail of this, but this is a good example of looking at areas of focus. Okay, so ballast water management, again, very interesting, big spike there, relatively low, but we can see it creeping up and we can see it kind of climbing on an arc there. It is an area of focus for the CIC inspection.
Yes, so concentrated inspection campaign happening this year, Tokyo, Paris MOUs. They will be looking at the systems on board and whether the requirements are being met. So it's one of those that would be very helpful in, if you like, preempting any problem. So getting ahead of the situation.
And ballast water, a good example of where you need to combine strategy. So there's understanding the legislation and the types of systems, but there is also a type specific element to it as well, and this just covers the understanding.
I mean, even something straightforward, rather like records, making sure that you've got the correct records, because that's the sort of thing port state control inspector, that's bread and butter for them. He'll focus straight in on that.
Also, we're talking about here, we know inspectors are going to focus on this, so people are getting ahead of the game by the looks of it and making sure they're prepared for it. So let's move on to inspection preparedness and some examples of what we could look at there. And the big story we'll focus on is SIRE 2.0. This is really just an example, I think, of where customers have got it right when we look at this, isn't it, Andy? A huge change to the inspection regime for tankers. Give us your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, the big change was really about these human factors coming in. So changing from the SIRE VIQ system to SIRE 2.0 with a tablet-based inspection program and a mixture of questions. And fortunately, there was a fairly long lead-in to this, and that sort of reflected in the early 2022-23 sort of figures. But then, of course, we got to the stage in last year where the system went live, and you can see that sort of ramping up there where people were.
Interestingly, I think looking at that was about I think it came in October or something in the end, didn't it? September, October. So people kind of left it, quite a lot of people left it quite late.
Quite late, yes. Yeah, they did.
But they got there, and that's the main thing. So again, looking at, how you can plan for inspection stuff is really good. Let's move on, just because we've got to try and get through the concept here. Security, another underpinning area. As you might expect, we can't focus on all the different areas that there could be in there. So we thought we'd focus on one where it's indicative of one of those big changes that's come along, and focus on cybersecurity. And I think that cybersecurity here, you can see there are some spikes, there are sort of, some tail-offs. It's sort of moving up and down, but increasingly an important part of it. And I think when you look at the big spike there, I think that more or less coincides with a big and very public incident, which obviously got most people going on that one. So to Jan's question, very often if something is in the news will then trigger a whole bunch of people kind of preparing for this one.
As companies realize as well that they might be vulnerable, and that there isn't that level of understanding within the company, it just shows the opportunity to rapidly deploy that e-learning across the company.
And there is also another thing. This is also one of our biggest sellers in terms of getting the certification. And we've got a whole session on that. But what that proves is that companies also really want to be able to evidence that they've done everything they can to cover, to make sure that people have gone through all of the training in the right way, because that then is a useful thing to be able to rely on should an incident occur. Now, there was a question about early on, Mikhail said something around, I don't want to paraphrase, but something around like, people using it for hard skills. Let's just move on to talk about like the idea of using for kind of more culture of care. And we've got a whole session on this. But increasingly people are seeing, could you go back one? Sorry, James, before. Increasingly people are seeing this as a topic where there's an element to it. And when I talk about these this subject, what I'm really talking about is a whole range of things, from how you look at leadership, how you look at communication, how you look at your bullying and harassment policies, your cultural awareness. All of these are things where there are potential elements of that. But in the interest of time, let's just zoom in on the one thing that is really top of everybody's list, and that is mental health and well-being. And we can see that is now pretty much core in terms of like becoming more and more kind of the thing. But the numbers are still pretty low in there overall, which is unusual, because this, as well as a piece of training, is not something we charge for. So everyone gets that free of charge. Right. But I think that, I mean, what's your view, just more briefly, I think, Andy, but like, what's your view on using e-learning for kind of those softer skills?
Yeah, I mean, it was a good question, actually, from Mikhail, because that's typically the company focus, to go to hard skills. But interestingly, combine this with the SIRE one before, people realized that there was a change, that there were these human factor elements to it. The performance influencing factors were part of the SIRE inspection regime. And there was an opportunity there for people to become familiar with what the inspector was looking for, and the opportunity to practice as well. So it can be used for soft skills. And one of the things I think with this mental health and well-being is the number of people on board who need to recognize signs of mental distress in other people. So it's quite likely that most of the people using this course is officers who have got that duty of care to the crew. But there's absolutely no reason at all why anybody shouldn't study this particular area, because they might, with a bit of self-reflection, recognize some issues in themselves. And I think you can raise awareness to quite a high level with on the softer side, rather than just on the hard skills with e-learning.
Yeah, I'll just say to add two things into that. I think one, this very good example here of something that you would never rely 100% on e-learning for. No. You're looking to use this as part of the mix. You're looking to use it as a way of starting conversations and kind of getting people to understand, particularly understanding the signs. Yeah. The first course I ever worked on when I joined in Videotel in 2005, in fact, it was 2004, I think, I was a contractor brought in to advise on a course they were doing on leadership and management. And that was full of soft skills stuff. And I will say, to this day, I remember a lot of the lessons that I learned from that. It was a really, really good course, and it kind of a lot of stuff about managing conflict, a lot of stuff around how to appraise, all of that. There's plenty of stuff that you can learn as we go along. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is something kind of interesting, right? Because when we were looking at the data and we were kind of saying, well, what kind of data can we share and what sort of stories might that lead to, and how would, sort of by accident, when we were looking at the wellness side of things, we saw an unusual trend. And this one is quite funny or quite strange, I guess, because there's something called cyber wellness, and it's not really that much to do with well-being so much. It's a little bit about that, but it's fundamentally a piece of guidance that was produced by Intertanko about making sure that people use technology well. So because they were seeing there were some issues that were creeping up with isolation, with distraction, those kind of things. And if we have a look at the data with this one, we can see that this is just a lot of the other stuff we've been looking at is groups of titles, 3 or 4, 5 or 6 titles. This one is actually just one title, completely unmandated. But what it shows is, I think, a real trend of companies picking up on this as a concept, as a thing that needs to be addressed, and really steadily growing there as well. So it's a really interesting example of just sort of like, I guess, how people kind of perceiving something in their company, and then sort of like looking to address that with an e-learning strategy. And it's interesting as well that it's an e-learning subject, or it's a digital subject.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those again knowledge gaps that people have, and we've got, if you like, younger people coming into digital natives, I think the term is now, who are using their phone a lot, are distracted by electronic devices. And it's really just a question of understanding when it's okay to do that, when you're off watch and, in your own company and so on, and when it's not. And, understanding that, for example, being distracted by electronic devices on the bridge has led to some serious collisions and problems.
And people staying up all night playing computer games, getting really engrossed, going on watch tired. So let's wrap it up. That's all the kind of data that we were going to share. I hope you found it useful. I want to get into a couple of the questions now. So let's just sort of take, understanding your obligations for compliance and performance. We talked about that. They're different things, but both equally important. Thinking about what you want to report on, the evidence, that readiness, the advantage of having a training library there is that if those incidents happen, we saw some of those spikes. If it's already there, if it's already in your library, you can activate that very, very quickly in response. The data, what is it telling you? I think probably don't have time to get too much into that, but I think the thing to think about there is what KPIs can you use, and then attach your kind of learning thing to drive that together, see what's happening in your business, and then see, can I move the dial? Can I lower, for example, the number of flesh wounds we're having with an e-learning strategy? Can I address some of those things that are coming up in port state deficiencies? Can I make those part of my training matrix? and also thinking about the trends in the market. So I've whistled through that really quickly so that we can get into the questions. And one of the questions that I want to, there's a lot of stuff that's come up about RightShip in there. So with regard to RightShip inspections, do you think completion of training modules, e.g. closed spaces, hatch covers, would be sufficient to comply with the requirements, or the certification should also be attained, but which is offered at a cost? So I think I sort of mentioned it there. Sometimes you can go the extra mile and get a certificate, Andy. I don't know whether you can answer that one, because I know you've been looking at this and talking.
I have, because RightShip constantly updating their requirements. This hatch covers was an interesting one, because they, in one of their previous RASQs, asked that all people involved in hatch covers should go on a shore-based training program, which was obviously impossible because manufacturers don't hold enough of them. And so they changed it and said, no, if you study e-learning in general, so general information about hatch covers, that would be one part of the program. The next bit is that you should study the manufacturer's documentation, and the third part is that you should receive familiarization on board. And so that's now their requirement, those three elements. So just doing the e-learning on its own is not enough. They actually want you to have a demonstration. So we've created a certificate which the captain can sign and then send in to us for endorsement, so that you can show that you actually achieved that. So,
yeah, that's just so people understand that the thing about the certification that's normally kind of takes it to the next level is that it allows you to bring in other things into the mix. Like, for example, sometimes there's written work, sometimes and the master normally signing an affidavit that something has been done. So it's that extra belt and braces approach that, for topics where, you know, people really want to show that they've done everything that they can, it's a good one to go to.
So in answer to that question, you really do need to look at the individual question to see what evidence that RightShip are looking for to decide whether e-learning on its own is enough with a certificate of completion, let's say from the OLP, or whether you actually need a certificate which has been endorsed by the company to say, yes, that this has been done.
Yeah. Any specific questions? There's quite a few comments, and we'll get into those. But please, if you do have a specific question, do ask, and we'll do our best to kind of give you some guidance there. I'll just zoom in on one of these comments. I think it's kind of an interesting one from Mikhail again, and he's talking about like this sailors kind of, you know, having to work through this kind of giant courses, and you know, really when they're sort of tired on watch and coming off watch and things like that. And he's sort of saying, you know, that sort of affects their ability to absorb, and we need to think about different approaches to learning. I think that's a really, really good point, you know, and I think that's why we need to be mindful that we don't, whilst I'm sort of suggesting these different topics, we have to be mindful that we don't overload people as well. So kind of thinking about what you want to prioritize is really important. And also we're trying to make the learning in more bite-sized chunks, you know, when we go through the library and we refine things so that we try and get them to be as kind of efficient as possible, and also kind of so you can study a little bit in little bursts rather than trying to sit there for 10 hours going through stuff. So that world has changed really quite a lot. But I think he also says as well, like looking at important to explain to seafarers the importance of growth mindsets with the examples of content. I think there's kind of, I haven't got time to read through your nice comment, Mikhail, but yes, that's the point really. If seafarers don't see this as something that's actually contributing to their ability to progress in their careers and learning really useful stuff that makes it more possible for them to do their job, we're always going to struggle. And that's also really part of that e-learning that e-learning strategy is also a big part of that, is explaining to people the context of why you want them to do that. And we could probably do a whole session on how you
definitely do that. I think as well that that is two-sided as well. That growth mindset comes from the company as well as from the individual. So if the company's interested in developing their people, giving them that opportunity, that helps to attract people to that company, being given those kind of opportunities for personal development. So it's a sort of a double-edged sword. You know, you can't do it if you don't have the systems in place in the company. And on the other hand, when you've got the systems, you do need people to actually use them to get the benefit from them. So it's a conversation that needs to be had around explaining to the seafarer, why should you do this? You know, and encourage them rather than force them. I think that's the way I would approach it.
Yeah. Just a comment from Olga as well. I just want to bring in, she's talked about being a training officer, using e-learning and familiarization with company rules and developing the seafarer's knowledge. The company rules thing, I think that's a really big part of it. We'll probably do another session on that where we actually talk about like induction into culture and all of that sort of stuff. And that I firmly believe needs to be part of the learning mix, because that's where you set a lot of the stuff that Mikhail's talking about, the context, why we want you to do this. You know, it's not good enough for companies to just throw something at a seafarer or anybody and say, well, you just got to do this. Why? Oh, because we need a box ticked. You know, it's got to be like, this is beneficial to you. It's going to make you better at your job. It's going to make you progress. You know, you have to explain the context of these things. Otherwise, why would people make the effort? But I can't see any more questions. So, and we are sort of just crept over time. So I think I'll hand back to James to wrap things up. But I just want to give my personal thanks to Andy. Always brilliant to get a chance to talk to you and for your insights and stuff today. And thanks to all of you for joining us. So over to you, James.
Thanks, Raoul, and thank you very much, Andy, as well. Thank you to everybody who's attended today and those who contributed to the conversation with sort of questions and comments as well. Just before I let everyone go, you will get an email from us with a recording of this, so you can recap on anything that you want to sort of maybe look at in a bit more detail or pass to any colleagues. If you do have any questions that you think of when you watch the recording, please, don't hesitate to contact us, whatever that may be. And just a final point just before we leave. Coming 3 weeks today, we have the next in our series of webinars, Preparing Your Teams for Inspection. And that will cover topics that include why inspection readiness is now more important than ever, what inspectors really want to see, how to best prepare your crew for success, and how training supports improved inspection performance. And we'll take a look at how companies learning with Ocean Technologies Group perform in PSC inspection. So again, that'll be another very, very interesting session that'll be well worth attending. So look out for an email from us about that. But as I said before, thank you very much to everybody for attending, and I wish you all a very good rest of the day. And thanks, Raoul. Thanks, Andy. Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye. Have a good day.